my remarks just about 5 minutes in length. So as a creator of a layer 1 protocol, I think instead of talking about really, specific use cases, I'm just going to cover two main topics. First, where I see the state of the DeFi industry as an asset class relative to asset classes broadly around the world. And second, what's it going to take for, and spoiler alert, I think it's extremely small and extremely incipient. But what's it going to take for DeFi to become, the behemoth that it can become? And I think it really comes down to two things, and I'll go into those two things. So where is the asset class relative to other asset classes? There's all sorts of articles that are trying to measure, total value locked and other metrics. But really, I think the most accurate measure is something that Covalent did very recently, which would put the whole industry at a size of somewhere between 700 million to 3 billion. And I think that's actually the most accurate way to think about it, because, when you think about the stock market in general, for example, if you take equities worldwide, they're worth about 70 trillion, but you don't count the value of liquidity pools that, things like Rentec and other liquidity providers add to the system, which would sort of 3 to 4x that number. But actual underlying value of equities worldwide is about 70 trillion, which shows you two things, right? Relative to just equities, which isn't even the largest asset class in the world, this industry is about 1/15,000th. The other thing that shows why the industry is really incipient is where yields are at. Think about yield in general. What is worldwide yield on money? It's a combination of inflation plus productivity growth. That's it. And as any asset class gets bigger or bigger, it approaches the yield approaches just productivity growth plus inflation. Worldwide inflation is somewhere between 1.5% to 3%. Productivity growth historically has been somewhere between 3 to 4%. And so you have a 5 to 7%, increase in asset value worldwide. This is mirrored in about 7% in what equities have yielded worldwide, and then 2 to 3% in bonds. And then, you have esoteric assets like private equity and venture capital that are in the low teens. Given that DeFi is yielding somewhere in the 20 to 30% range, is also a barometer to show you that it's very, very early, and the way the industry looks like right now is unsustainable. No matter what kind of asset class you create, no matter what kind of company you create, you're never going to get over human productivity and then inflation. That's just the natural end state of any form of asset growth. So how do we get from, call it, 700 million to 3.5 billion to becoming, a monster? I think there are two things that need to happen. The first one is standardization, and the second thing is governance models. These are the two biggest things that are missing in the industry. So let's talk about standardization first. And instead of talking about finance here, let me give you an example to make it, more real. Think about your mobile phones and devices that you connect to your computers. The reason why you can use a myriad of devices on your computers is because USB is a standard. As an industry, device manufacturers and programmers have agreed that we will use USB as a communication standard, and this has caused explosive growth in usage of devices and interconnectivity. Similarly, the internet would never be where it is if we hadn't created TCP/IP. Now, you can create any sort of application on the internet, but everyone's agreed on what the packets look like. For DeFi to become a real thing, and for massive bonds, actual equities, et cetera, to be mirrored and actually deployed on blockchains, we need to develop a standard for all of these asset classes. If you think about it, there's about 26 or 27, there's about 9 to 10 kinds of bonds, 4 or 5 kinds of equities. And the moment these are standardized, that's when you'll see the boom in the industry. And the reason is because then interoperability is automatic, swapping is automatic, and everyone's agreed on what the terms of these underlying assets are. Some work I would point you towards is this organization in Switzerland called Actus, which is very close to being FDIC approved. We're actually looking to work with them quite a bit on the standardization of smart contracts around all of these assets. And eventually, if we can all come up with a standard, You know, we're an infrastructure layer, not an application, but hopefully it makes everyone who's building, you know, these state-of-the-art applications, including the panelists you spoke to before, they'll make their jobs a lot easier and enable bringing a lot more of what's viewed as traditional Wall Street onto the blockchain. And then finally, and you know, the list could be much longer, but the other thing that's really, really holding back DeFi is governance. Having adequate on-chain governance is extremely important for DeFi to grow. Because think about it, if you're telling people, hey, you can put equities on the blockchain, they'll say, well, we already have the infrastructure to, you know, buy and sell equities. It's only interesting if we could do things like automate proxy voting, for example, automate share class conversion, for example. And the only way you can do this is if you have adequate governance systems. The governance systems in blockchains today are very, very, what I call, they look like on and off switches. You know, you have multi-sig wallets, but you know, they're just a bunch of on and off switches. What you can't do today on most blockchains is create a governance model which would enable something like a shareholder proxy vote, or enable covenants to kick in and have debt recovery. This is extremely important. It's also one of the areas of research that we spend a lot of time on to ensure that you could have weighted keys and weighted key management to ensure that governance of underlying financial assets is incredibly easy. So TLDR, I'm not trying to throw water on the industry. I'm just trying to say we're in very, very early stages. I'm really, really excited about the industry, but there's a lot of work we need to do. But I do think as an industry, if we can mature into creating these standards and create responsible governance models and responsible technology to ensure great on-chain governance, I actually think this could be a multi-trillion-dollar asset class. And of course, you know, we're willing to work with anyone to figure out how we can best address those ideas. Thanks. That's my view on this, and I appreciate your time. And thanks for listening. Cheers.